Hi friends, continuing to the chapter A Vivid Picture of a Contemporary India. What slow us down? It is an essay on a vulgar things to please the mob and not a very arduous task to astonish them, but essentially to benefit and improve them is a work fraught with the difficulty and teeming with the danger. The stubborn persistence of a democracy is one of the Indians' surprising achievements. The time and again, Indian democracy has shown itself to be a resilient and enduring, giving the lies to the old prejudice that if people live in a poverty, they are incapable of the kind of self discipline and the sobriety that makes for effective self government. Yet, it is an infuriating democracy with poor governance and fragile institutions that have no delivered enough prosperity to the people and the rate of change in too slow. The center of the gravity of the Indian democracy shifted precedibly to the right in the 90s with the rise of the BJP and the decline of the Congress party. The historical holes of the Nehru Gandhi family also diminished. Many Indians who have grown up under the umbrella of the Congress for 40 years were worried and they wondered what is this new popularization of power might mean. Some thought it was a good thing, arguing that a modern democracy needed a viable second party and it gives a victor a choice. They pointed to the Anglo-Ceylon models where the two-party systems was the foundation of the political stability. The issue that remained unresolved in India minds was that how the BJP was going to evolve in the future. Would it be able to move into the moderate mainstream, shed its secularism, distance itself from the more financial elements, and become a sustainable right wing alternative to the Congress party? This chapter is about our political economy and the frustratingly slow pace of our economic reforms and the poor governance are the two themes that run through. Democracy became capitalism. Democracy and the capitalism have emerged as the dominant problem solving institution for human being in the modern society. After the collapse of the communism, in particular, country after the country has been embarrassing these two institutions. In this great adventure of modern civilization, each nation is trying to adopt these two institutions to find the right mix of the market competitions, politicalism, participations, and the welfare. More than 50 countries are engaged in the economic reform as they make the transmission from inward looking authoritarian economics to open market driven ones. India is one of these and among the best place to make a quick and a successful transition to the capitalism. Unlike Russia, it has had a high developed national market going back to the 17th century, which was integrated further when the railways came in the 19th century. Unlike China, it had a robust indigenistic final financial system, which was upgraded into a modern banking system in the early 20th century. Unlike Russia and China, India also had a clearly defined property rights, a well developed commercial law, and an English speaking interpretations and professional class. Unlike India, democracy followed capitalism in almost every nation. In the country after a country in Europe suffrages was gradually extended over the past 150 years, and it slow altered existing capitalism institution and their practices. This unique reveals explains a great deal about Indian society today, including the failures in the governance and the painful slow paces of economic reforms. As mass political parties and trade unions develop in the West, democracy begins to impinge on capital institutions and practices. The democratic property for redistributions and the labor union started to constrain the productivity and risk-taking spirit of interpretations. This process cumulated the school Second World War in the welfare state in West and in Japan, with social insurances and the healthcare or extensive regularly framework designed to protect against the shortfalls of capitalism. It is possible that capitalism not been so modified by the democracy, it may not have survived. In India, on the other hand, democratic institution came up before we had the change to create a industrial revolution. Even today, our 60% of our people continue life in rural areas. Organized labor constitutes less than 10% of the total labor. And the middle class, despite tripling over the last 2 decades, it is less than 20% of the population. Because of the unique historical reveals, populist pressures for redistribution, the P built that before it was baked. We set up a integrated regulatory network before the private economy had transformed a ruler into an industrial society. We began to think in terms of welfare before there were welfare generating jobs. The result, as we have seen, has seen thralling of enterprises, slow growth, missed opportunities, huge subsidies, and a rapiers beneficiaries. It is the price we have paid for having democracy before capitalism, or rather, too much democracy or not enough capitalism. We also underestimate the difficulty of transforming an orthodox, centrally planned economy into a market oriented one. The state cannot merely withdraw from the activities by privatizing them. Some liberal thinks that markets are natural and they spring up on their own. The belief is based on what Adam Smith called Mam's prosperity to the markets truck and exchange one things for another. Markets, however, do not work in the vacuum. To function smoothly, they need a network of regularization and institutions. They need umpires to settle disputes. These institutions do not just happen, they take time to develop. Thus, the reform is not an easy path. Experience around the world over the last decades reached teaches us that market generates preserve result in the absence of a good regulatory institution. At the same time, we may have reformed our policies, but we have not dismantled the huge bureaucracies created by the license Raj, and they keep putting up the obstacles to change. While it is easy to blame democracy for our failures, there are the other reasons behind our poor performances. An important one is our tendency to always place politics, it seems to me, reflect the concerns of its people. During a visit to several countries in Southeast Asia in the early 90s, I noticed that the newspaper carried economic and the business news on the front page. In contrast, India's newspaper stuck to politics. 10 years later, in 2001, I visited China and I was again struck by the same contrast. Whereas economics is at the center of China's agenda, politics continues to dominate our debate in the parliament, in the newspaper, and on the streets. During my visit to Thailand in 1991, I met a successful Japanese businessman and he told me that he had invested in Bangkok because Japanese labor has grown too expensive for making his motor parts. Why don't you think of investing in India as well? We too have a cheap labors. He crudely replied that Thailand is a good place to do business, India is not. I pointed out that we had done a lot to liberalize the economy. Ha, but you have a long way to go. Thailand is a way ahead of you. Everything works here. Thailand is also more linked with the world. They have lower tariffs, lower taxes, and a disciplined labor. They are rapidly privatizing and the old monopolies are disappearing. But we have a more educated workforce, I said. But I can remove a worker here who does not perform. I can't in India. Then he added, I suppose the most important reason is that the Thais want us and they want to learn from us. India only wants to give us advice. I asked him how India could be made more attractive to him. Your reforms will only begins to work, he said. When you remove your brokerages from the economics jobs, this was a sobering conversation. I came away thinking that hopes of the common person in India were not different than theirs. Then why is that economics issues are not at the center of our concerns? Is it a failure of a democracy? Why do the representatives of our people not respond to the economics aspiration of the people who have elected them? It is a good things that in the 90s we began to be exposed to how people live in other countries. Thanks to the satellite TV channel, I wish our people, especially our members of the parliament, could see the programs process made by the people in the East. I wish we could transport all our members of the parliament to the countries of East and Southeast Asia, especially to the China for a short while. It will open their eyes and make them think twice before they toughlessly places politics before economic on the national agenda. While the ordinary citizens in India obviously care about the food, housing and the schools, he does not understand how economic reforms will help improve his life. He does not understand how making India a good place to do business will translate into more investment, more job for the children and more prosperity for his family. The average Indian does not understand that the Japanese investment will bring a technology and work habits with it which bring him improve the skill of our children, that it will improve the quality of our products and raise our capability to export. That improved exports in turn will allow us to import even more products which will compete with the Indian products. And this is a competition which force Indian companies to further upgrade their products, productivity and the skill of our workers. As skills and the productivity climbs upon, so will the wages, and this will result in a higher standard of living and a better quality of our life for our children. This is a challenge for our politics and all our politicians. They have to translate liberal reforms into the languages of the common person. Just as Nehru sold socialism to the masses, so must they sell reforms and liberal economics to the voters. None of our politicians leader have done this in the 90s. They have tried to reform by the sheath and we are paying the prices for it today. This is why every Prime Minister wrings his hands when he is asked why the reforms are stuck. Our failures are due not only to the democracy preceding capitalism and because we place politics before economics on the national agenda, but also because we are poor at implementation. If there is a widespread consciousness on economic reforms, as everyone says, why are there such frustrating delays in implementing them? If we are agreed on what is to be done, why don't we just do it? One reason is that we haven't had a true reformers at the top, such as Deng or a Thatcher. Equally, we haven't had reformers at the head of our economic ministries. Partially, those dealing with the infrastructures. Our discourage on reforms is also a dysfunctional. We continue to waste our engines in debating the what when we ought to focus on the how. How to reform is more difficult challenges and it is not for lazy minds. Indeed, problem solving ability and it needs mental toughness. Most of all, it requires acute attention to the detail. It is not for drawing room amateur. We Indians are good when it comes to defining the board pictures, but we fall apart when it comes to detailed planning and the tactics, which leads to the successful implementation. This is a flaws that attaches both to our public and private sectors. Hence, the product and the governance are both shoddy. Most of our politicians and the business suffer from this disability. Our political parties are also a mental lazy. The leftists want more money for the poor. No one grudges them the money if they actually reaches its beneficiary. Why does the leftist parties apply their mind to redesigning poverty programs so that the poor actually receives the benefits? The voters will respect them and might even vote for them. Instead of breathing multinational companies, let us learn from them. One of the first lessons that a young manager in a good company learns is that God is in the detail. It is not enough to have a broad strategy. Success depends on pretending the details of an issue. One has to be mentally tough in choosing between unpatchable alternatives. It is in the attention to detail that allow multinationals to deliver awesome performances. Example, reducing the cost by 30% across the globe within 9 months by involving 1 lakh people as Nissan did in 1989. We commonly make the mistakes of blaming our character or ideology or even democracy for our national failures, when the real felon is more pedestrian. It is the unhappy ability to translate though into an action that afflicts our public life with a devastating consequences. Nehruism, socialism need to have a retrocted into license Raj had our civil servant possesses better management skills. East Asia grew twice as rapidly as India between 1965 and 1985, not only because of a better strategy but because of a better execution. Not because it saved or invested significantly more, but because it had the ability to make it investment more productive. During the last decades, every government have wanted to reform the economy. Yet, why have we suffered such heartbreaking delays in implementing the reforms? How do reforms requires mental application and the ability to implement? And this is preciously what are public figures, both politicians and the civil servants, seem to lack. Our politicians and the civil servants feel to say seems to fail when it comes to detailing planning, monitoring, reading alternatives, courses of the action, follow through and showing the determination to say that the course that eventually leads to delivering results. And important reasons for Narasimha Rao's peculiar success between 1991 and 1993, I think, was his administrative ability, and for this he is not given sufficient credit. He brought in the right people, Manmohan Singh and P. Chidambaram, to head the right ministers. He brought in an reformer, A. N. Verma, and his principal secretary, whose office became the control room for implementing the reforms. Rao encouraged Verma to create a implementation structure for executing the reforms. This was the famous hands-on Thursday committee of a secretary of both economic ministers that I wrote about in the India Unborn. It coordinates monitoring, gain cabinets, constant for an unimplemented reforms week after a week. Verma ran his community tightly. No one was allowed to travel on Thursdays. The committee met for only 2 hours when the reform question was openly discussed. Verma summarized and monitored the outcome, and reform proposal was taken to the cabinet for approval the same day and then on the parliament the following weeks. The succeeding governments followed Roy's strategy but without his executive ability. They continued to reform the softer area, and they did not comfort the main interest group. They trod gingerly, either striking this group or giving them a pain in a slow, incremental manner. This, of course, does not argue well for the future of reform in India. Who is going to bell the cat when it comes to tougher reforms? The present BJP leads government appear to be serious. It has an ambitious privatization program, and it did announce a bold labor and an agricultural reform, but it has not shown the will nor the administrative ability to deliver the result. Because of a strong veiled disinvestment minister, only privatization have moved ahead. Reform, of course, do not happen without reformers. Even the most reform-minded minister need an officers to help build pro-reform coalitions in the brokery, the part and its parliament. Just as Narasimha Rao had Verma, so Manmohan Singh had Monak Singh, Chidambaram had Jairam Ramesh, and Vajpayee had N.K. Singh. These ministers, officers, partners have been crucial in making reform happen. Those who criticize the Prime Minister office PMO for becoming too powerful forgot that in our political model ministers are independent and someone has to coordinate our chaotic government. Ironically, they appear to be the better performers in the state today than at the center. For example, S.M. Krishna in Karnataka, Chandrababu Naidu in Andhra Pradesh, Digvijay Singh in Madhya Pradesh. These are quietly transforming their state with the help of the hand-picked doors from the brocheries. One of them is S.R. Mohanty, a civil servant in the Madhya Pradesh. As head of the Madhya Pradesh State Bridge Corporation, he has got the country's longest toll road, connecting Indore and Idabelad going. Now he went about in his instructive. Mohanty and his team of 3 discovered that the Public Work Department (PWD) had a rupees of 120 crores road maintenance fund. With the Chief Minister's support, the team put this money into a skinning fund and used it to raise rupees 500 crores through bonds with the help of SBI cabs. Having overcome the single biggest hurdle of financing the infrastructure, the team focused only on 3% of the state roads, which carried, however, 80% of its traffic. It announced the projects on day 1. It opened tenders for the in-road Adalabad segments on day 25th. It got all the government clearance on day 34. It issued a letter of intent by day 39, and developer began a construction of world-class highways on day 49. This is the implementation. The second generation of reform will need huge administrative skills because of a thorny labor, agriculture and the privatization issues. The Prime Minister has to surrender himself with a proven team of doers with strong networking skills. But the more important, he has to set the agenda and send clear signals about what he expects from his ministers and civil servants. Then he has to monitor progress. He must wake up each morning and remind himself that nothing is more important to him, his party and the India further than the prosperity of his people. And this will only from implementing reformers. Remember, good leaders do few things, but they bring all their and their organization energies on that single focus, and they execute brilliantly, and the history does not forget them. Can the BJP become a conservative party? When the reforms were stuck in the 90s, some liberal voiced that idea that India needed a new political party. Amartya Sen called for a right secular party. I am an unpretended liberal, and I would be thrilled to see that liberal force strengthen in India. But I am also a pragmatic in thinking that a classical liberal party like the old Swasthania party will not survive. And when it dies, liberalization will get a bad name. Over the last decades, we have seen ample proof of a damage that marginal parties have done to the polity. The answer, alas, is to defend on either the Congress or the BJP are two main parties to push economic reforms instead of starting a new party. I would rather that liberal reforms infiltrated either for mainstream parties and subverted them from within a favor of liberal agenda. Economic reforms originally belongs to the BJP going back to its Johnson days, and its earlier manifestos clearly advocated that. However, the Congress stole this platform from the BJP's under the pressure of the 1991's economic crisis and engaged in the vigorous reform between 1991 and 1993. However, it stopped reforming after that and seems to go into a shell of a self-doubt. These doubts have continued for 10 years, making the ordinary person wonder if they were excited a real convictions in the party in a favor of liberalization. This seems to me is an opportunity for the BJPs to gain the redefine itself as a party of reform. It will entail the educating its supporters in the basic of a liberal economics. But we have not seen this in the BJPs, nor have we seen that competence to deliver these goods. Thus, a liberal cannot trust the Congress because of its static tendencies, nor does the BJP inspire any great faith despite its rhetoric of reform. In fact, its culture's agenda make it even more unattractive to a decent, free-thinking Indians. So what is the choice for the ordinary, reform-minded Indians? History teaches us the modern democracy needed a vibrant two-party systems. With much pain and experimentation, we seems to have got there. We are now have two variable parties at the center. The Bogage, the third force, have been wiped out. Recent experience around the world also teaches us the parties only win elections when they move towards the center, because in every society people tends to be a concentrative. The only hope for the BJP thus is to shed its financial rights and for the Congress to expel its lunatic left. Only they do that, the liberal wings of the two parties, the one who favors reforms, will be automatically strengthened. As the decades of the 90s wore on, the BJP did show as the decades of the 90s wore on, the BJP did show hopeful signs of moving into a moderate mainstream. The media calls it Vajpayean, but many BJP leaders seems to have a genuinely realized their party can only succeed at the polls by widening its popularity and shedding its narrow securitarism. There is a significant opposition from within and especially from the RSS, as the Vajpayee has made the part rethink its identity and urged it to distance itself from the religious fascinating amongst its some Sakh Parivar supporters. Partially under pressure from these coalition's partners, he also made his colleagues realizes that rightness parties only succeed at the polls when they marginalized the fantastic at the fringe. But the Hindu-Muslims violence erupted in Gujarat in 2002, which left more than 800 deaths, and voters began to doubt if the BJP could ever never become a non-sectarian party. Neither has the polarization between the Congress and the BJP brought the stability that Indians have hoped for. Neither party was able to win a majority in the parliament in the 90s, and we entered a melancholy era of coalition governments. The inability of the BJP to win a majority is partially the result of its weak performance in the state party, a suspension about its sectarian chapters, and partially it is own fuzzy images of itself and what it stands for. The Congress, despite its waning popularity, it's more predictable. It represents a viable left of center alternatives for the Indian voters. But Sonia Gandhi leadership is a real issue. If the BJP want to seize this historic, must sharpen opportunity and become a stable right of the center party, then it must sharpen its poisoning in the mind of the protest. To employ a phrase must love by the marketing fraternity. What the better was to do this, I believe that to position itself as a traditional conversation party of the sort that we are familiar with the from the history of Anglo-Saxon countries. It will then have a positive USP, a unique spelling propositions against to borrow from the marketing jargons rather than its current negative anti-Muslim images. In order to become a true right of a center party from an economic viewpoint, The BJP needs to demonstrate greater commitment to free markets and economic reforms. The voter distrusts the Congress communities despite Manmohan Singh's historic achievements. No one has attempted to sell the economic reforms. Least of all the Congress has the right things to do in order to build a vibrant, competitive economy which will do more for the poor than the tried old socialist and the populist solutions. The Swachhanda Party attempts this tank 30 years ago, but its timing was wrong. The national center of gravity was too far to the left at the time. Today, more and more Indians understand that the Socialist Party is over, that we need to dismantle controls and cut the red tape, and then 10% of the Indian organized workers cannot hold the other 90% to the ransom. While Vajpayee government maintained a strong rhetoric of reforms, its overall performance with regards to the second generation of reforms was poor. It did not show the deep commitments that was needed to dismantle the institution of the past, nor has its earnest told the reforms to the voters. Many in the BJP also need to shed their attachments to Swashdeshi and their allergy to the foreign capitalist. If they want to make India a good place to do business, but must demonstrate greater commitment to the foreign investment and to the global free trade. But first, they need to engage in vigorous domestic reforms. Given their wishes for a strong India, they could begin by making Indian a common market. With the plethora of ostriches, police checkposts, differencing the sales tax, the ordinary business person faces any army of rent seekers in the transporting his good across the country. In order to become a true right of center party from an economic viewpoint, the BJP needs to demonstrate greater commitment to free markets and economic reforms. The voter distrusts the Congress commitments. Despite Manmohan Singh's historic achievement, no one has attempted to sell the economic reforms. Least of all the Congress has the right things to do in the order to build a vibrant, competitive economy which will do more for the poor than the tried old socialist and the populist solution. The Swarnamariya Party attempted this task 30 years ago, but its timing was wrong. The national center of the gravity was too far for the left of the time. Many in the BJP also needed to shed their attention towards the Swadeshi and their allergy to the foreign capital. If they want to make India a good place to the business, they must demonstrate greater commitment to the foreign investment and to the global free trade. With its strong root in the small trader community, the BJP is wedded to the brokerist value of thrift, hard works and the discipline. These are the same values that the conservative parties have traditionally exposed. These are also the values that have made 20 million overseas India one of the most successful global communities. Thus, it is not such a big leap for the BJP to occupy the empty space, that it is available for a party that espouses facially conservatives, pro-business, free market policies. It must first sell the idea to the India voters that pro-business does not mean anti-people. This is what the consecutive parties have to do everywhere. It is succeed in doing that, then it could become a viable alternative to the left-center Congress. The BJP is right to believe that the national pride can lead to a competitive advantage. Pride, however, is a result of the performance and does not come from testing nuclear bombs or bashing Muslims or Christians. Performance is measured by social development and economic prosperity. This is, in turn, come from a single minded devotional to the liberal economic reforms and a dedication to improving the opportunity for the education and health of the people. As a conservation party, it is right and proper for the BJP to be drawn to traditions. But if it wants to become a successful at the polls, it should look at the rich tolerance and synthetic traditions of India's past. Rather than its own narrow version, a Hindu is by definition inclusionary. He worships all deities and his mind is stubbornly elastic. Buddhism disappeared from its birthplace partially because Hindus started to worship Buddha as one of their gods. The BJP should tap into the rational and worldly traditions of India's past. Many Indians have got into a wrong in thinking that India's past is mainly religious and other worldly. Ancient India was far more balanced. Look at the marvelous animal stories of Panchatantra, the love poems of Vidyagara, the real poetics of Arshadashta, the policies of Chakravarti, and the great Indian text of astronomy, mathematician, and the medicine. Even the ancient religions of the Vedic text is speculative and not dogmative. There is a high worldly drama in the epics. This India is a positive, upbeat, and a self-confident in contrast to BJP's India, which suffers from the feeling of inferiority and hurts pride from the recent denomination by the Muslims and the British. Is the BJPN then capable of transforming itself into a responsible conservative party? This depends in a part on whether the Indian electorate is capable of supporting such a party. Mr. Vajpayee records would suggest that the party is evolving. The major disconnect of the voters with the BJP is not on accounts of ideology but of competitor. The BJP has been unable to provide the day-to-day governance that the voters desperately seeks. Until it does that, there is a little point in the speculating about its ideology. Living with the Colossians. The results of 1996 Lok Sabha election, when no party got a majority, cast a show of gloom over the country. The mood of the nation quickly turned to one of a unnecessity as our worst fear of a hung parliament were realized. People were terrified by the expression hung parliament because they failed coalition governments of 1977 and 1989 were still fresh in their mind. The prospectus of a national front left from ragback coalitions and a return to a authentic economy policy began to haunt industry. This has been the fairest and the cleanest election in memory, and the Supreme Court has brought down a dozen corrupt politicians. The states has begun to assert their independence. With the Gandhi's dynasty absence, politicians has become a modest as a appropriate in a democracy. Moreover, the previous 5 years had been the best 5 years in our economic history. The people were confident as they went to their caste, they vote, but the cautious optimism remained when the verdict was announced. These melancholy fears reflected our Anglo-centric world view. The democratic ideal held out to us is of a stable two-party system as practiced in the United States and the United Kingdom. We should look instead to the experience of our other multi-party democracies. On the European continents, coalitions have been a routine features of public life in the past 50 years. Yet these nations have continued to prosper. The biggest and the richest German have been ruled more or less continuously by a coalition in the entire post-war period, and the average coalitions lastly 37 months. Switzerland, which has a higher per capita income than the United States, has institutionalized the collalities. It is a plural society like India, where the political party vigorously represent the interest of three major language groups: French, German, and the Italian, and the two religious groups, Catholic and the Protestants. It is a traditional for the four large parties to come together after an election and form a coalitions. Poland's economy too have boomed in the recent year despite numerous coalitions. Thus, the workable coalitions can be formed on a stable foundation. In our cases, unfortunately, we cannot escape the truth that the coalitions are extracting a heavy prices by slowing down the reforms. Coalitions come from the Latin word collatia, from collarisa, to grow together. It reflects the primordial human situation of a interdependence. Coalition in the policies are not fundamentally different from joint ventures in the business. Two from even competitors will venture join hands to pursue a common objective. A joint venture is successfully only when it merges the different strength of its partner. Skill is the key word. The coalition of 1977 and 1989 failed because our politicians lacked the skills. They do not learn the nature of the interpretations and could not subside their egos and ideologies for the sake of coalition. Business people, on the other hand, have an initiative sense of a mutual dependence because every business transactions involves a buyer and a seller. Unless both gains from the transaction, it doesn't go through. The 1996 electorate veteran threw up much more than three nations combined. It reflected also geographical diversity and religious aspiration. This is not surprising in a plural and heterogeneous society. If America is a melted pot, India is a salad bowl. In sociologist Nadi words, our identities are sharply defined despite a sharp nation ethos. A truly national coalitions should be able to accommodate the aspirations of the Dravid parties. That is, in Tamil Nadu, the amphibious of the linguistic, and the North Karnataka and the Akels in the Punjab. It is somewhat the way a company manages the aspirations of a wholesale in Tamil Nadu, a software supplier in Karnataka, or an after sales service provider in Punjab. What are the foundation of a successful coalition government? First, it must be for the long term. Only then will there be a commitment for its member and stability for the government. It must not be experimented, otherwise it will not last. Second, it must be created in a transparent manner. There must be not be a secret deals, otherwise horse trading will destroy it. Third, it must be authentic and non-consistent ideologically. This means an upfront agreement on a minimum program and equally an understanding on what it will pursue. The lack of the ideology in the current election suggests that we have a large area of a shared belief and an consensus on vital social and the economic issues. During the past 5 years, the nation has deviously shifted to the right, and during the past 5 years, the nation has decisively shifted to the right, and this must be reflected in the ethos of the combined. We may be learning to live with the coalitions, but the disappointment fact is that we had too many governments and too many prime ministers in the decade of 90s. 6 prime ministers to be the perceive and 5 governments. This is too much democracy even for a people who are addicted to democracy. People do not like instability, and where Mr. Vajpayee government was pulled down by a single vote in 1999. They were visibly upset. I must confess that I was outraged. I am not a superior of the BJP, but I feel that something terrible has gone wrong. Here was a popularly constituted government, and it was toppled on the most frivolous grounds. That Vajpayee was returned to the power later that year is less significant than the pain. The cost and the distractions to the nation is having to go through a second election so soon after the previous one. Part of the Congress party continued unpopularity in the subsequent years. I am convinced stems from this black ash. Then we all have these small politicians with small reputations and small parties thinking they are the emperors of India, because neither of the two major parties is able to manage a majority. What do we do with these Jayalalitha's, Mulayam Singh Yadav's, Bal Tilak and Lalu Prasad's? The problem is not only the behavior, it is the impact of their actions that are bringing bad values to the public life. The problem of too many governments in the last decade is a synthetic failure. According to my philosophy friend Dorab, in 177 parties contested the 1999 parliament election, and 94 parties got a combined vote of less than 0.05%. 139 parties did not win a single seat. 12 parties won 1 seat, and 24 won less than 5 seats. Clarity, we must do something about our marginal parties. Something that the answer is an American style president system, I disagree. Although the American system will give us a fixed term government for 4 to 5 years, we will still need a parliament to make laws and pass budgets. And an unstable parliament could make some laws and pass budgets. Parliament could stop all the legislations or even close down the government by not passing the budget. This is what happened in the United States in 1995. The legislative executive rivalry is a big problem there. We are, if anything, more quarrelsome than the Americans. We are also more federal, and we will turn our president into a monarch. Thus, despite its my attraction, the presidential system is really not suited to our temper. Another possibility is a multiple vote system of the kind practiced in Australia, where voters rank candidates according to his performances. The candidate who gets an absolute majority based on the voters' first prefers win. If not, the voters' second performances were counted, and this goes on till someone gets the absolute majority. The virtue of this system is that it will eliminate 175 out of 177 parties, leaving us with a two-part systems. Its drawback is that it will eliminate all regional parties, and that might be too undemocratic. A third alternative is a German one, which requires a positive vote of confidence. This means that a sitting government cannot fall unless there is a replacement government ready with a majority. This instrument will give us a more stability, and the BJP favors the idea. But this system too suffers from the same defeat as the American systems. Although there will be a government for 5 years, Parliament could still remain paralyzed, which is as good as having no government. So we are back to the square one. I favor another German solution, which was Abitibi, debated by Dorab and Ashok Desai in Business Standard in 1999. Sopriwala suggested that no party oath to get a seat in the parliament unless it receives 10% of the vote, in eighth of the largest state. This would leave us with only two parties, the BJP and the Congress. Desai offered a simpler criterion, 5% of the national vote, under which the CPM would also qualify. Sopriwala worried, however, that a coalition of the Yadav cousins might get more than 7% because of their clots in Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and this may not solve the problems of instability. The 10% criterion in 8 states would ensure that either national parties would emerge or regional parties with a national orientation would combine to form a national alternative. Whatever the solution, the people want urgent electoral reform, and the government in power must give it highest priority. No single party or grouping can manage the reform on its own. But if the BJP and the Congress agrees on this, and they should, since a two-party system is in their interest, they should be able to pull it off.